Right, so the fallout from Labour's nasty gutter politics attack ad continues to rumble on today as Keir Starmer and co are utterly unrepentant about it, still defending it. In fact, yesterday they demonstrated the weaponisation of child abuse by implying Rishi Sunak is on the side of the abusers, making it all about him. All on the poster, if you haven't seen it. It was actually just the first in an intended series of attack ads featuring Rishi Sunak, we later found out, implying something not reflected in actual law, nor even in Tory policy. It's just an attack aimed specifically at him. It was so bad, so inaccurate, that Twitter added a context box to it for clarification. Now, goodness knows, I don't want to come across as defending the Tories in any way. I want to be attacking them, and I want to be attacking them based on what they are doing and what they are saying, and want an opposition that's doing the same, isn't trying to outdo being like them, but attacking them too. But it's got to be on their record and not making up stuff they're attempting to get to stick to the Tory leader. It's like they're using everything that worked in getting rid of Corbyn, making it all about him, breaking him as a man, and trying the same dirty tactics that successfully rid the Labour right of Jeremy Corbyn behind closed doors. And they are now doing the same thing in the public domain to get rid of Rishi Sunak. It really ought to be showing people just how deeply disgusting and low the Labour right wing are. But where the media was on their side in helping this factionalism remove Corbyn, rotten lefty, right wing as they all were, but the case is not the same versus the Tories, where many papers, in fact the majority of them, and not just the Tory leaning ones, have attacked Team Keith for their depravity. As I said, they're unrepentant though. As I said, this was just the first, because Labour dropped yet another advert later in the day yesterday. This time the ad saying, do you think an adult convicted of possessing a gun with intent to harm should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. Under the Tories, 937 adults convicted of possession of a firearm with intent to harm served no prison time. Labour will lock up dangerous gunmen. Again, we know there are failings in law and order. If these statistics are correct, apparently based on Ministry of Justice data, then using them to say what a Labour government would do instead, including the hows and the whys and the wherefores, and not just a bland statement akin to, we'll fix it, honest gov, not like this guy, would be more welcome. But instead of saying what Labour would do, the biggest elephant in the Labour headquarters living room, as it is, as it remains so, as it's been for 3 years, after a dozen relaunches, because still nobody knows what Keir Starmer would actually do if he ever got into power. It's a question that remains utterly unanswered. We know nothing about what this man would actually do and actually stands for, because he's changed his mind and lied about so much. Instead, they just attack Sunak personally over this. What do you reckon? Do you see shades of how they binned off Corbyn with what they're doing here? Because the tactics seem horribly familiar to me. At any rate, this tweet again has had a context box added to it by Twitter, where the context provided with links to the relevant legislation once again says the Labour post misrepresents Rishi Sunak's stance on gun crime, and that the current legislation and sentencing guidelines in the UK state that imprisonment up to life may happen for any type of gun crime. The Conservative Party have no plans to remove or change this legislation. Labour advisers are apparently very pleased with themselves with what they're doing. To me, aiming it at Sunak personally by putting him on the front, using his signature as if he's signed off on what Labour is saying about him, is false representation to hide the fact they've no idea what they do themselves, no idea what they're doing themselves, and they're prepared to double down on stuff like this despite public outcry, still in the belief you're going to vote for them anyway to get the Tories out, and therefore thinking they can get away with these actions. But maybe instead they've perhaps just forgotten their own part in this. Let's go back to the first advert a moment regarding exploitation of children and the accusation that Sunak is soft on targeting child abusers. Now, of course, government make the laws, but different departments within the government can be charged with helping to write said laws, contributing to the final whole, if you like. The Minister for Justice doesn't single-handedly do everything when it comes to writing such laws. They have advisors, they have junior ministers, they have the civil service, they have various other government departments they can refer to for expertise. And the same goes for all government departments, of course. But when it came to the issue of child sexual abusers and the sentencing for such crimes, which Labour are accusing Rishi Sunak of being soft on, it turns out that the sentencing guidelines relating to this legislation were handed to a non-ministerial government department to make recommendations on, to write the sentencing guidelines on, the very thing Labour is attacking Sunak over. And that department was the Crown Prosecution Service, overseen, as I'm sure you are more than aware of by now, by a Director of Public Prosecutions. This happened in 2012 and 2013 when the Director of Public Prosecutions was one Keir Starmer, KC. Labour are attacking Sunak for being soft on child abuse when Starmer was part of the team that oversaw the writing of the very guidelines in the law that Sunak has been following in government. Now, how this worked was that the guidelines were decided and written by the Sentencing Council within the CPS on which Starmer sat. They met 3 times throughout 2012 and Starmer's final year as DPP in 2013 to discuss and agree guidelines on sexual assault sentencing guidelines to be used to decide whether or not paedophiles should go to jail and for how long. This would then be written into law by government, and thus the law of the land then makes its decisions on such crimes based on them going forwards. The Sentencing Council at this time were discussing sentencing guidelines for sexual assault, and they decided there should be 2 sets of guidelines for sentencers, depending on whether the crime affected a child or an adult. Now, we all take childhood to end at 18. That's the legal age that adulthood begins. We know the age of legal consent is 16. So you would think one or other of those ages would be where the Sentencing Council, where Keir Starmer and his then colleagues would set this legal boundary for their own sentencing guidelines. Except they didn't. They set it at age 13. The Sexual Offences Act of 2003 was amended to include this, though retained the offence of the victim being under 16 and the attacker knowing this. Sentencing, though, based on Starmer's attack ad against Sunak, you'd figure would mean instant imprisonment to some time duration or other, especially with Starmer accusing Sunak of letting 4,500 nonces off the hook, quite a lot given he's only been PM for 6 months. But this is also dishonest too, of course. These figures apparently date back to 2010 when Starmer again was Director of Public Prosecutions. So who let who off the hook then? It's especially relevant since the figures date from before Sunak had even become an MP. So singling him out as to blame for this might not have been the brightest idea. Anyway, the sentencing. Such crimes carry a sentence of up to 14 years imprisonment, but at their lowest carry a sentence of just a low-level community order. So not all transsexual offenders under sentencing guidelines, Keir Starmer would have had a part in drawing up, as part of the Sentencing Council, warrant imprisonment then. How many of these 4,500 cases you accuse Sunak of not locking up were not considered to have committed an offence warranting prison then, on your advice, Keith? Is the case not that if all of this were taken to court, you'd actually have more evidence against you, according to your own attack line, than Sunak does? The disgust many have felt by this advert on its own will now only be compounded by the fact it's blown up in Starmer's face, given he is intrinsically linked to the very guidelines the government and the courts will have been following since then on such matters. But hardly anyone is talking about this outside of alternative media. Now, I always use the example, would the mainstream media have given Jeremy Corbyn a free pass over this when I use this comparison? And if the answer is no, then they're failing in their duty to hold power to account, which is allegedly what they claim to do. Starmer wants to run the country, and this is his track record, far more so than Sunak's. And yet he's choosing to stick it on Sunak rather than hold his own hands up for his own part in this. And he's using it as electioneering material. It's depraved. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Cheers, folks.